right, here we are again. It's Thursday night. I'm here with Anthony once again, and we're gonna continue our talks on the PlayStation 1, and then I'm sure we're gonna just jump right into PS2 because I don't think we're gonna be talking too much about the other systems that were out at the time, mostly because he and I don't have a lot of overlap with that as far as I played GameCube.
Yep, I would say the fault there is mine because I was kind of a one system person, and I didn't really get into Nintendo until much later in life. And so I think you said that your family kind of grew up on the Super Nintendo and then the Nintendo 64 and all of that stuff. I never had access to those things until I was older, and so Sony was kind of my. I jumped from Sega into Sony, and so this was kind of my childhood right here.
We have forgotten to talk about a couple of the. I mean, there's just so many games that were on the PlayStation 1. It's hard to just remember them all. We made like a light list, but the main games that we forgot were Spyro. I don't know how we didn't talk about Spyro because it damn near became the mascot of the system unintentionally.
Yeah, I think right there alongside Crash Bandicoot, it's funny we put that list together and we almost forgot about them because they're so obvious. You know what I mean? Like they had so many good games for so long that those two brands were almost synonymous with PlayStation. Spyro, especially, kind of. I'm not sure what the term is. You just run around and collect gems. It's very similar to Donkey Kong or Banjo Kazooie. That Nintendo had, and so I'm sure that was the reason for the spinoff. But yeah, that the Spyro games were very influential for me just because it was like we talked about this last time, a voiced game, which that instantly brought the quality up, and then just kind of an open world that you could explore.
I mean, it being voiced and then doing similar things like world exploration. I mean, that was what Mario 64 was doing over there on the 64, you know?
Yeah.
It was crazy. It was a crazy game. I that may have spawned my love of dragons all throughout my childhood.
You think about those games and how influential they were. In retrospect, I couldn't tell you a single story beat from any of those. I think in the first one you're saving the dragons that were turned into stone. That almost didn't matter. That was almost secondary to the fact that I'm just having fun. They drop you into a world, let you have fun, and then the story just kind of comes out of that.
Yeah. My memory of the game is very poor. I remember playing it. I remember having it. I remember thinking it was really cool, but I can't remember if this was like like an Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine said this or what. But I remember it being like one of those games that was like made by one guy. Was that true? I don't even remember.
Uh, I don't know if that was the case. I mean, if it was, that'd be insane. If it exploded into what it was from one guy. Yeah, I don't know. Again, like you said, I think a lot of that information is kind of lost to time just because like I haven't gone back and read any of those magazines, since I was a little kid. But yeah, I'm sure that was featured in quite a few of them.
That could have just been like that childhood playground knowledge that was spinning around. I've not gone back and tried to research it,
Yeah.
but it's just pretty powerful, influential game. I didn't really continue playing that series after the first one.
Okay. Yeah. So the first three are really, I think, the most influential to me, and then I think with all game series, once you get past the initial trilogy, it kind of falls short. You have to be really die hard into something to continue it past a trilogy, and so I think the first three games for me are what stuck in my brain as these are must plays. These are absolute classics, and then after that, it kind of started getting into we're kind of dragging Spyro's dead body along for the ride here. Yeah, yeah.
Kick of the Dead Dragon. Well, so there was a lot of games. There were so many games on that system. Like I didn't get around to playing all of them. And plus, I mean, there were like the greatest hits, and so you could get games for like nothing. Normally, you'd have to pay like the premium, but then all these used game shops start popping up and stuff, like GameStop and just mom and pop shops, But I didn't get to play some of these games that we wanted to talk about last time, which was, and I'll let you just take off from here, but they were Spider-Man, the X-Men game, and Tomb Raider. And you were talking about Spider-Man a little bit after we had finished last time. I was like, dang it, we should have added that to the list. What were we doing?
Yeah, for me, it's crazy trying to think of a list of the best games on PlayStation because they're like you said, you're talking about the difference between like a 10 out of 10 game and a 9 out of 10 game, and then it's like, well, the 9 out of 10s are getting shunned. For me, the Spider-Man game was as close to watching the animated series on TV as you could possibly get. I mean, the game was so, and keep in mind, this is my childhood brain making a game better than I'm sure it really was, but you had the entire city that you could swing around. The Spider-Man games that just came out on PS4 and PS5, I think did a tremendous job of replicating that feeling of go wherever you want, do whatever you want. And it was a linear storytelling game, so you couldn't truly go wherever you want. They would block you out with fog, or if you tried to go into the park, you would fall into the water and drown. Which at the time you didn't think you were being boxed in. You just thought, oh, okay, cool. Like I shouldn't go there. I'm not ready yet. Yeah, for me that game was just so cool. You fought the entire rogues gallery of Spider-Man villains. So you fought Rhino, eventually Venom. You fight Venom, and then he teams up with you halfway through. And I don't know. Like again, the story. I couldn't tell you a single thing that happens in the story, but I just remember playing that game multiple times as a kid and thinking it was just the best thing ever. And then just kind of snowballing off of that, because, like you said, this is kind of where I think you guys in your family kind of started broadening your horizons, where I kind of narrowed my focus. For me, the X-Men Mutant Academy games, it was a side-scrolling 1v1 beat 'em up fighting game, and you used the characters from the X-Men universe. I want to say it's from the X-Men movie uh, that came out. That I might be completely wrong on that as well, but um, it was just insanely overdone in the sense that like you would press one button and your character would do like an eight hit combo. It just felt cool without having to know all the moves. And of course, had characters that everybody knew. Wolverine, Gambit. Uh, Watching Charles Xavier fight the other X-Men was hilarious. Yeah, I don't think that was necessarily like the greatest game of all time, but that was definitely one that after we got done recording, I was like, oh, I can't believe we forgot about that. And then of course the Lara Croft games, it kind of fell into the same territory as Spyro, where I think the first three games were incredibly cool because there weren't very many representations of cool women, and yeah, I didn't know that at the time. I just thought, hey, this girl's cool. You get to play as an adventurer. I want to play as an adventurer. She is an adventurer. That's cool to me. And obviously, after the first three games, it kind of went off the rails. I don't know if you played any of the PS2 Lara Croft games, but she eventually turns into like a psycho and goes against the government, I think, and then she gets brought back in and she's okay again. And but I remember the original trilogy being so cool because it's like, again, that storytelling that's almost aimed at a kid, where okay, we're gonna go into this biome and you fight dinosaurs. Well, that doesn't really make sense. Who cares? You're fighting dinosaurs, and you go into another biome and now you're fighting tigers. It's like, oh, that's really cool. It was very clearly designed for kids, but I remember that being an amazing trilogy of games as well.
Man, just to kind of roll back here and what you were talking about with the Spider-Man, I remember you were talking about how cool it was that how they handled like the broad open environments of like web swinging through the city into the like the fog, and then you couldn't swim. That was always a test in a game. Can I swim in this game? You jump in the the water and you die. And you go, not in this game.
Yep.
I think that ties in really well to Silent Hill and how they handled the limitations of the system.
Yeah, exactly. It really felt like they were, obviously you're constrained by the limitations of the technology that you're using, but it really felt like they were embracing that as opposed to using that as a crutch. It just felt real. It felt like a Spider-Man game. Obviously, I'm sure if you went back and played it now, the new ones are much better. But yeah, I remember that sticking out as one of, I can't believe we missed out on that.
I mean, the Spider-Man games that I had played were on the Super Nintendo, and they were really fun, but they were obviously side scrollers, and you just never got that feeling of web spinning, webbing through the city and all that. You wanted to, and you had the buttons that do it in those games, but it just wasn't as cool as you had described this game. Of course, Spider-Man has gone on to have tons of games on the PlayStation for years, and Sony's held on to that IP for ever now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that maybe defined Spider-Man, from all the other superhero games is that mobility, especially vertical mobility where, you I think every game has a go collect 10 apples. Go get me 10 pelts out of the woods, go kill 10 rats and bring back 10 rat pelts. Every game has that. I think the difference with Spider-Man is when you're swinging through the city and climbing up buildings, you feel cool doing it. Even if it is collect 10 daily news newspapers or backpacks or whatever it is, it just feels cool.
Yeah. And Spider-Man was very cool when we were kids, man. Like they had the show and it had that song Spider-Man, Spider-Man, radioactive Spider, and we had all the toys. Of course, that was about the time that I had discovered Venom, and I just loved Venom, and I still do. And just to see like the whole gambit of the characters in a game, that would have been really incredible. But we just, for some reason, we didn't buy it. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen the meme or not, but there's there's a very funny meme of Venom in that game. Obviously the storyline is that he senses Carnage and he wants to go fight him himself. Spider-Man and Venom kind of have this loose team up, and then as soon as he senses Carnage, I'm gonna go fight him myself. I don't remember the punchline of the joke, but essentially they're standing in a library and Spider-Man's like, okay, we just need to be quiet, gather some clues, and then we'll get out of here. And Venom just like turns his head and is like, gotta go, jumps through a window, smashes the window, and Spider-Man's like, all the alarms are blaring, and he's just like, what the heck, man?
I'll have to look that video up. That sounds amazing.
I think there's something to be said about games that have tie-in. You'd mentioned this, tie-ins to shows or cartoons, and just being able to immerse yourself in that world. I think that's such a cool thing that's lost.
Well, and you were, jumping over to the next game that you talked about, that X-Men game, in a sea of fighting games at the time where it was very old school button inputs that were carryover from the arcade. I'm sure that there was a lot of fighting games that were experimenting with like, what, this is definitely limited to just a controller. We can't expect these kind of inputs that we do from an arcade. So kind of interesting. I never played that game. It sounds really cool.
I'm sure it was, it's not going to make any top 10 list or anything like that of best PS1 games of all time or anything, but that was one that stood out when we finished recording our last session, that I was like, oh man, I remember playing that and it being really good. Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily that the game was insane or the story was insane. I think it was just the characters, being able to play as Gambit or Wolverine or whoever and thinking, I think this character is cool and I get to play as them. I think that was a big part of the game being as fun as it was.
Yeah. Man, it just, I don't know. That just sounds really cool to me. I'm just like, yeah, I want to push a button and it does all the moves in one hit. That
Yeah.
sounds sick.
Yeah, I remember the grabs especially. So you would grab somebody, and in most games, you grab somebody, you flip them to the other side. You're doing it to get out of a bad situation or put your opponent in a bad situation.
Mm-hmm.
I remember very distinctly in that game, it was like a mini cutscene of you just like beating up this other person with this. I mean, it was essentially a special that you were doing with a grab.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would just cut back like nothing happened and the other guy was fine. And it was like, whoa, that's cool.
Oh, man. So then you talked about Tomb Raider, and my only experience of playing Tomb Raider was on a demo disc that I played incessantly because it was really fun. And what a cool like way to interact with like the environment. You could do these like running jumps and then pull yourself up, and like you said, you could pull out the guns and shoot them. And there was different creatures and things, which to me, I didn't realize it was supposed to be in like real life because, well, just assumed everything was fantasy when I was a kid. I don't know. It just was a really awesome game. Like you said, there weren't a lot of games or a lot of media really that had a female lead. And to have that was really cool. This really powerful woman just beating ass, and you're like, damn, she's cool. I like her. But I never ended up buying that game either. I don't know if we were too young and our parents wouldn't let us, maybe.
I think it might have had a that that was kind of around the time when video games were kind of getting scrutinized by the government and everything was getting labeled as this is corrupting your children and all of that stuff. So I do remember there being a pretty hefty rating on that game. But again, it was one of those where I think there might have been a secret scene, or maybe again, this is a rumor that never was, like Mew being under the truck in Pokemon. But I think there was a thing where you could like lock the butler in a freezer in her mansion, and it would kill him. And I remember the government being up in arms in that and being like, "Is this what we want our kids doing?" And it's like the entire game is about a girl, flipping around and shooting things with guns, and they got mad about that. But it's like, yes, yeah, that's. I remember that for whatever reason, that game getting unfairly. I don't remember if it was rated like T for teen or if it might have been one of the first M-rated games. Surely it wasn't M-rated, but yeah, I remember it being fairly controversial.
It had to have been like 18 plus or something. I just don't remember. We were still pretty young then when that game came out. So I don't know. Those were some of the gems on that system, but there was a lot of weird stuff going on in gaming then. There was a lot of sexualization of things and crossovers, different stuff. But some of the games that I remember, maybe I didn't get to play as much, but I didn't mention was Saga Frontier. I don't. Did you get to play that game?
No, that was one that you had played and I had not. So I'll let you kind of paint the picture on that one.
I was full on into RPGs then, and it's a JRPG, but it was really weird. It was a lot different than anything I had played before, which I hadn't played a lot yet then anyway. When you started that game, you could pick from like a multitude of characters, and then there would be these little sub stories about these characters, and they would kind of cross over. Sometimes the characters from the other stories would be in the stories of these characters. And it was really cool. The combat system was really, I want to say, unforgiving. It was really hard, and you had to do everything just right, or you just got annihilated. And it really pushed the boundaries for me as far as like min maxing at the time. I'd never done anything like that. Especially, even playing Final Fantasy VII. I mean, we just slapped on what looked cool. We didn't think about, oh, this is optimal. Maybe after a couple times through, we were like, enemy skill is busted, Of course, we didn't say busted then. I think that's kind of a new term, or one that's come back. I don't know. I played that, and I thought that game was really good. That's another Square game. It's just been really released fairly recently. I need to pick it back up and play through it again. There's another story that was cut content, and I'd like to jump in and see that, and also refresh my memory in that game. Because it just was really, the Saga games are their own series that's kind of gained some popularity here in the States. I don't know if in the West as a whole, but I've seen a couple other of the Saga games, and I don't know, they're really interesting. But another one that kind of really took off but never got its own proper sequel, more of a spin-off of a spin-off, and itself was almost I think started out as a Chrono Trigger game, like Chrono Trigger 2 or something, and then they made Xenogears, which that game is incredible, but I don't remember a lot of it, mostly because my younger brother, he played most of it and we watched, but it was an incredible game, following like a human character that could get into a mech, and then there was a bunch of like karate kung fu moves going on. I mean, it was just an incredible visually very incredible game. 2D, 3D graphics, stuff I'd never seen before in a game. I want to say it was near the end of life of PS1, but I don't remember.
I'm kind of in that same boat where I definitely remember playing it, but I don't remember any of the story beats or anything like that.
That's entering a list of I need to replay it because I'm an adult now, and I wonder how the adults of the time felt about it. Who played it? Who were gamers?
I think it had some pretty heavy themes, and I just didn't understand them at the time, and so I kind of just sped through the story. And I was like, big robots. That's the thing that I wanted. Neon Genesis Evangelion thing where it's like, oh, sick, cool robots. And then at the end, you're just sobbing in your hands.
What did it mean? The last game that I'm sure a lot of people remember, but maybe wasn't played by a lot of people because it's hard to find now. And we had a copy of it. It was Legend of Dragoon, and it had voice lines. I never ever made it very far in that game because it was very complex. It just wasn't as easy to understand as previous RPGs that I played at the time. But it was really cool. A lot of the voice lines are still burned into my head. Harpoon! But there was a lot of games like that I don't know if they started out on the PlayStation or they got moved over from other systems. I'm not sure. But one that I need to go back and play because I'd gotten so far in it. I don't know. My old brother was notorious for deleting my save files. Was Lunar 2. That game was really cool. It had a ton of voice acting. And very, very much in the time period as far as like how dubs sounded, which is really nostalgic to go back and hear those kind of that style of voice acting. I don't know. It's just really interesting. They're talking about RPGs. I always want to go further into that topic, but there was one RPG that had come from the Super Nintendo. Capcom had made it. Was Breath of Fire. They made 3 and 4 and put them on the PlayStation. I really enjoyed them. I really enjoyed the Breath of Fire series. It's one that's kind of faded into memory, I think, at this point. Capcom's got better things to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the reasons that we started this was just the fact that there are so many games that are lost.
Yeah.
A lot of things get remakes and a lot of things get remade, but I think on the other side of that is there are a lot of things that don't, that maybe should have. You remake the great games when really the games that need to be remade are the ones that were kind of 7 out of 10s. Bring them into the spotlight. I hadn't planned on talking to this. This wasn't on our list or anything, but I think it was called Parasite Eve.
Oh!
Is that the right name?
I can't believe I left that out. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, kind of like a Resident Evil spin-off. It's not even a spin-off. I mean, in my mind, it's like diving off the deep end.
It's a Squaresoft game.
Yeah, I mean, they just went crazy with that game. That's one that I would love to get a remake on. That is, those games that were so weird and crazy. I almost feel like there's kind of a stigma about remaking those games. You want to remake the classics and the hits. Remake the games that were insane. Those are the ones I want more of.
I was kind of having this conversation with some other people earlier this week we were talking about Mega Man X, and I was like, "Oh, you played Mega Man X? That's so cool." What did you think about the remake of Mega Man X 1? It was called Maverick Hunter X, and it was on the PSP. Did you ever play that? They were like, "I never played that." Also, why would they remake the music in the game? It was perfect. And I'm like, "Well, you're right." And that's kind of, I think, some of this stuff, maybe it doesn't need to be remade. It just needs to be re-released in a way that we can get it and not have to rely on emulation or something. It's just like all this history of gaming that if you didn't get to play it and you don't have access to the media, then there's no way for you to have that foundation in gaming that we all got when we lived growing up through it. But I just thought it was really interesting conversation.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of similar to movies. It's kind of that old head way of thinking of saying, "Oh, I can't believe you've never seen that. You need to watch that." It's like, well, that movie came out in the 80s or the 70s. Of course, a younger person hasn't seen it. It's kind of that same way with video games where you go, "I can't believe you haven't played that." And then you sit there and think about it. And it's like, that game came out before they were born. Of course they haven't played it. And then there's no easy way for them to play it. HDMI TVs, there's no way to convert a PlayStation to I mean, obviously there is, but not first party. Yeah, there's obviously modding and, like you said, emulation. But if I wanted to go out and buy these games that we're talking about, you look up on eBay. This is a passion that I have. You look up the prices of some of these games. Some of these games are $80 to $100.
Hell.
When we got them, they were $20.
Even if they were full price then, to see them full price now or even beyond that is just like astounding. It's like, how much is that? Which I can understand games that were limited print because maybe they were end of system life and not that many people bought the game because it wasn't popular. And that's always a shame too, because really the end of system games, those are going to be some of the best games that are going to, visually, they're going to be some of the best games that come out for a system. You look at like the beginning of, say, the Game Boy Advance and then the end of life Game Boy Advance games, they are incredible.
Yeah, I think a thing that goes along with that is game that comes out at the beginning of a system, they really don't know how to use even the controller. We've talked about, I think, in one of the earlier podcasts about standardized controls. It was the Wild West back then. So you could have one game where I think it's kind of standard now that shoulder buttons are shoot buttons and all of that stuff. You could have a game where shoot buttons on X and something else is on the shoulder buttons, and you have no clue what buttons you're supposed to be pushing or anything like that. I think by end of console life, you kind of have that standardized, okay, this is what we need to be doing. The analog sticks weren't a part of original PS1, and then they were end of life PS1. That was a huge thing, was being able to have more than 4 directional buttons at once. You could go in diagonal directions, which was crazy. It's crazy to think that that was crazy. Yeah, just a lot of things that you don't think about until retroactively you kind of go back and think about it, and it's pretty insane.
I mean, really just controllers in general. You were talking about the non-standardized controller. There was a certain company at the time who shall not be mentioned, but
Yeah.
they really were controlling as fun as funny as that sounds, how people made controllers, and that's why we saw Sega's controller looking its way, and the D-pads, the just like the D-pads all being different. It's so crazy to me that D-pads were made like that and different, but I never understood why. I always thought it was because they were trying to be different from different, from each other. But there was like patents and things and copyright, and they had to be careful. Man, you're talking about the buttons being on the top now, which is really funny. I'm thinking about more modern here, God of War, the attack buttons. I mean, you almost need to have both your index and your middle finger on the triggers. I said that today to, or not today, yesterday, to one of the younger gamers I play with. I was like, yeah, I just can't believe that sometimes games want you to have both of your fingers on top. I can't do that. And they're like, how do you not hold a controller like that? I'm like, because that's not how I grew up holding a controller, you know? And it kind of hurts.
Back in my day, we didn't have shoulder buttons.
I had to get me one of those controllers that has the buttons down at the hand grips, so I can press
Yeah.
the buttons, so I'm able to pull, because I can still pull the triggers, But it's just so crazy that a lot of like your most common buttons to press now are on the top. Because when they first introduced that, let's say Nintendo had the top R and L buttons. I mean, they barely used those buttons. I'm not even sure why they put them on there half the time, 'cause it didn't really do much.
Yeah. Like you said, we kind of have to be careful what we're jumping over, because we're going to go into a huge rabbit hole if we're not careful. But I remember Jet Force Gemini being the game where
Ugh.
it's like, what the heck? You had to hold like the L button, and then you aimed with the analog stick and fired with the Z button. But then when you weren't aiming, you had to switch back over and use the R button to like center the camera.
Oh
That
boy.
that one was ridiculous.
I'll pull us back here because there was one more game that I don't know if you played it. I don't know if I played it, but I know we played it once we got to the PS2, and it was Front Mission. What an incredible game! They were like, "What if we made Gundam? what? What if?" And was that a SquareSoft game again? Like, talk about brand loyalty here that we have.
It was, yep, it was, and I think pretty much anything released by them was a hit and was amazing. I remember the PlayStation 2 Front Mission 4 much better than I do the earlier ones. But you're right, that was right around the time of Toonami and Gundam Wing coming out, and I just wanted any mech game that I could get my hands on. And I remember Front Mission 4 especially, just that feeling of I am a Gundam pilot. Like if I was a Gundam pilot, this is what I want my mech to look like. This is the weapons I would want. This is how I'd want to move around, and it just let you do that in a turn-based, tactics style arena battler. I also think the storyline of that Front Mission 4, just a bunch of degenerates finding an entire country's worth of gold in a fight where the losing side left their gold. And then it's essentially a heist movie for the rest of the game, trying to get the gold. You find so much wealth that you literally can't physically carry it away to spend the money. That to me is a hilarious storyline.
There was another game that I'd forgotten about that I played the crap out of on PlayStation 1. It's Armored Core.
Yes. Yep.
It's still, they still make this game, and I always tell myself the next one I'm gonna get. But playing the original, like you're talking about, this is what I want my Gundam to look like. I mean, oh man, you could do all that. You could put all the different parts on there. Hell, I want to say Virtual Fighter was on the PlayStation where you could like make your own moves and stuff.
I believe so. Yeah.
That game was crazy. Well, of course, we didn't do anything good in that game. We were a bunch of dumb kids.
Yeah. Well, especially on Armored Core, that was Dark Souls before Dark Souls. And so I remember there being a weight limit. Whatever your core was, whatever size core you had, that determined how much weight you could carry. Well, I was a dumb kid, so I was just like, I want all the guns, give me everything. So I was just trudging around with, I had the fat roll before the fat roll was a thing. It was so
Yeah,
fun.
that game. Oh man, I can't believe we almost forgot about Armored Core. See, there's just too many games on that system. I'll tell you another game that really wasn't a game, was more like a software. It's made fun of now, probably more than it should, but only because of the easy access of the software, was RPG Maker. I remember dumping hours after hours into that. No keyboard, typing in the lines of my characters, making a storyline every day after school, just working forever to make a game. I think I never made more than like 10, 20 minutes of a game to play because it was just so cumbersome, and
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing half the time. But man, I loved that. It was so cool to be able to make not just a game, but like the genre I'd kind of fallen in love with at that point, which was RPGs and turn-based games. And it was just so cool to be able to kind of know what was going on. Feel like I know how they made this.
Yeah. I think even that in itself might be a lost art in itself, which is I think a lot of PlayStation 1 games let you do your own thing. You were talking about make your own move in fighting games, or I remember in sports games you could make your own plays. I think that's just kind of a lost art.
Yeah, you do it.
You do it. Make your what you want to see, and if you
Hmm.
think it's cool, then it is cool, and you do it. And yeah, obviously I didn't put much time into RPG Maker, but I certainly put my time into, those old wrestling games where you could make your own wrestling move, and you do a quadruple moonsault off of the top rope and then land on the guy's chest. Yeah, just the craziness that came off of that.
I loved the unrealistic things that could happen in those. Like, because I remember making moves on Virtual Fighter where the guy like just fell straight down, and then the other guy would just take a ton of damage, just broken as hell. Like, oh my god.
I would love to see that be a genre of fighting game where you bring your own creation into the arena and you fight the other. We're obviously making the most broken thing that we can, but it's almost seeing who can break the game the most to win.
I'm trying to think if there was anything else on the PlayStation 1 just off the top of my head.
Yeah, I'm sure there was. I'm sure we're missing stuff. And like you said, I think a lot of it too was just the fact that
Hmm.
demo discs were so much more prevalent. The one that I always think about, I can never remember the name of the game because it was from a demo disc. But the point of the game was it was essentially a tower defense game, except for well, you were setting traps down in a mansion, and you're this helpless girl setting traps down, and these monsters were coming to get you, and you would basically run in a circle through your traps and then make the monster set off the traps, and then when you were done, that would give you more power ups and stuff like that. I can never remember the game from the demo, but again, it's like I would have never played a game like that had I not played the demo, and so I think that's just something that is lost in and of itself, which is hey, here's new games, try them out. I know Steam tries to do that
Hmm.
um, a little bit, but the front page of Steam is basically
Yeah.
completely allocated to AAA titles now.
I wonder if that game was Clock Tower.
It might have been, yeah.
John used to play the Clock Tower games on the on an emulator. I think they were on the Super Nintendo or something. Another game that I didn't even think to mention. I don't know why, because what an influential game to me, and I think to you and to many many others, the Harvest Moon games. They had kind of gained their strength from the Super Nintendo, which I had gone back and played after I played the one on the 64. That was the first one that I played. But playing it on the PlayStation, wow, what a game.
That game in particular kind of illustrates the need for an easily accessible way to go back and play those old games. I think you can argue that the PlayStation 1 Harvest Moon is better than anything that
Yep.
has come out since. And I don't think it's ever been replicated. Like we just finished a Stardew Valley run, and I think Stardew Valley is the closest that you can come to the original Harvest Moon games.
I'd say that, well, and we're talking about a more modern title and remakes and things, which I don't know, we've really gotten into that topic yet. I mean, obviously, Harvest Moon has taken everything that was good about the PlayStation 1 Harvest Moon game and turned it into Stardew Valley. It's incredible. It has
Yeah.
a lot of the same kind of elements. Even the harvest sprites, you could hire them, and then in the new one they have in Stardew Valley they have the Junimos, and you could do that. You could get little guys to live on your farm and do all your farming for you. I mean, I that was one of the first. The PlayStation 1 was the first one that I min-maxed like crazy. I had so much gold in that game. I don't even know how I figured that stuff out because, again, there wasn't a lot of ways to figure that stuff out without some kind of help, but maybe it was just because of hours and hours played. But I can't believe I almost left off Harvest Moon, man.
Yeah, I think that was one of the very first times where a romance option in a game was so foundational to playing the game. I based everything I was doing was based off of, oh, hang on, I got to run this to my sweetie and make sure she gets a little something something, a little sugar from the farm. Oh my gosh, man. And I think we joke about it now when we play games all the time, but that was huge back then, was having a romance option in a game.
I think we did talk about Harvest Moon. Now that I'm thinking about it,
We might have.
because I remember you going, "Oh, well, who'd you marry in that game?" Because we had never talked about it, and you said Ellie, and I was like, "Me too."
Oh yeah. Yep.
She was my sweetie. The baker's wow. And then I went for the horse
Yep.
girl. 'Cause,
Anne.
I don't know. We were just changing it up. Yeah,
Yeah, that was my sister's pick, was always Anne.
that's funny. My brothers, since me and my brothers all played it, well, your woman was off limits to them, and vice versa. So we kind of got to see every single romance that there was in the game because of that. Of course, there was only female romances in Harvest Moon. So sorry, you ladies out there that want to go back and play it, unless you're into that, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like that was kind of the case for a very long time. We kind of talked about it with Tomb Raider, but there was very little representation for anything else because it was already such a niche group.
They were like, only boys like gaming.
Only boys like playing this game, so only boys have a romance option.
Bullshit. Yeah, like what? First of all, isn't that kind of a weird thing to assume that a boy's gonna play a life sim?
Right? Yeah.
I mean, we did. That was my jam.
We grew up in the Midwest, so look outside. There's your
Yeah,
life sim.
game of farming, cool. I want to play that. I don't know why I don't even remember why we got the first Harvest Moon game that we bought.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of times too was you would just go to school and somebody would say, "Have you played this new game?" It's like, "Well, no." And then it's like they're sitting there telling you how cool it is, and it's like, "Well, I got to get that." And then you run to the store and there it is on sale for $20. And you're like, "I got to have it."
A lot of it too came from those gaming magazines, like EG. Well, ours was the EGM, and you said
Yeah.
yours was the PlayStation Sony Monthly or whatever.
Yeah.
And if they had a good review, if it was a 7 or a higher, we would buy it. Like, oh, let's see what's in the reviews. Oh, a 7. Then you go check your favorite game to see if it was in there that you had found on your own. And if it was like a 6, you'd be like, bullshit. That game was awesome. What do you mean it's a 5? Of course, those were all biased opinions, just like ours are right now, right?
Sure, yeah. Well, and I don't know if it was the case for your magazine, but they always had this is this guy's specialty, so he knows what he's talking about. And it's like, okay, yeah, I want to see what he thinks about this game.
Yeah, we had that. They probably just dubbed different guys like, hey, you're the guy. Oh, I don't want to do the sports games.
Oh, absolutely they did.
I don't know. The PlayStation had just like shook our house. Like we were like Nintendo folk, and then all of a sudden we had this PlayStation and played all these games, and then they announced the PS2, right? And we're like, I guess we're getting that. I don't remember which one of us, because it was always like one of us. You had to go and get your own money, that you had to go work mowing yards or whatever we did. And so then that person would buy that system, and then the other person would buy a different system, and then we would have multiple systems because of that. That's just showing my privilege, I reckon.
Well, I think back then, it's not like it is. Well, I guess it is like it is now, but a system was a big deal. That was huge. Because it meant new and better games, but it also meant it's going to be very expensive. And like you said, you kind of had to find ways to schmooze up to your parents and be like, okay, I'll pay for half of it if you pay for the other half. And then it's like, okay, but this is going to count for your birthday and for Christmas. And it's like, okay, yeah, deal.
That would be what. Yeah, we would get like that we would get a system as a Christmas present. That was usually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was probably more likely except for the GameCube. I remember working my ass off to get the GameCube, but the PS2, man. I mean, what a powerhouse of a system. Do you remember what game that you got first for that system, or was it kind of like you got a couple?
I do actually, and I remember this being a big deal. I can't remember the year. I want to say it was 2001, maybe. Well, whenever the PlayStation 2 came out, it was that year's Madden, and I remember thinking it was the most realistic thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. This is real football. You know, I joke about it now, but my dad walked in, sat down, and was watching it, and then he was like, "Wait, are you playing?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a video game." And he was like, I'll be darned. You know, like obviously obviously he didn't think it was like a live game or anything like that, but it was like, dang, the graphics are pretty good on that.
I don't know where we're at on our time here, but the first thing that I kind of want to talk about with the PlayStation is once again the controller, because by then we had the DualShock, and pretty much in the state that it is now, its shape has changed here and there, but that
Yeah,
original PlayStation 2 DualShock, that was the controller in my opinion. Like I loved that controller.
I man, you know, PlayStation has really done. They kind of knocked it out of the park early and then never changed. And you're exactly right. I mean, to me, that is iconic in my mind. You briefly talked about how crazy and I think Nintendo very obviously tried to challenge and push the envelope and make every console unique with their unique controllers. But Sony keeping that, like we said, it was end of life PlayStation 1 that came out with the analog stick, and then PlayStation 2 having DualShock where it vibrated. I mean, that was insane to me. That it felt real. It really felt like something would happen on screen and it shook your controller. It was like, oh my gosh, this is insane.
I mean, controllers vibrating now, it feels like nothing new to us, right? But it's just much more, the haptics are much more pleasurable to the mind. Like there were so many different controllers at the time. The N64, like I don't know what the hell they were doing with that thing. That thing was a wild ass controller. Obviously, it's for that system and that's it. But Nintendo that's when Nintendo really started doing that. Like, what controller are we gonna come up with next? We gotta shake it up once again. But Sony just like, nope, this is the banger. This is the good one. Fucking slap some joysticks on that bitch. Like, then we can play fighting games at home, you know?
I don't know if this was the case in your house, but it definitely was at mine, where you had the official Sony controller, and that was the good one. That was player one, and then player two had like the off-brand, like Mad Catz version. Yeah, mine was the one where you could plug it into the USB slot and it would like vent air onto your hands. And I just remember thinking like, I think I got it for like my birthday or something like that. And I was like, oh, cool. But it's not Sony branded. But then you sit down and play with it, and it's like, oh, this actually kind of feels pretty good.
That system entirely, it really wasn't built for multiplayer like the N64 was, which probably fit our household a little bit better because there was four of us. So when we would play the PlayStation, like only two guys or one guy would be able to be playing. So that was kind of like we're watching. That's the watch system, and the N64 is like, all right, everybody sit down and grab a controller.
Yeah, I think that was the first time we instituted the rule of, if you die, you pass the controller. Yeah, because like you said, everybody couldn't play. That was just a limitation of the system, and so you found unique ways to get everybody involved, whether it was friends or family or whatever. It was you would play until you died, and then you pass the controller, and then if you were on a really tough part, the person who was the best would try to beat it, and then when they beat it, it was like, okay, we can go back to the rotation.
Yeah, if we'd passed it down the line, then it would get passed all the way back up the line to the older brother. Hey, can you beat this guy? I can't do it.
Yeah.
We want to see what happens. Beat him. Doesn't matter which one of us does it. That's just that one of us does it. I think that's probably a good place to stop for this. But we're gonna continue here because we want to jump into more of the hardware, and then jump back into the software